Alright, in this video I want to discuss Milton Friedman. Now, Milton Friedman is one of the rare figures who I have very mixed feelings about. Typically with me, when I look at an economist or a political theorist of some kind, usually I end up really disliking them and condemning them, or proving them overwhelmingly. But there's a few who I've actually it's hit or miss, and Friedman is one of them. And I think Milton Friedman is significant in that he is still basically considered the paragon of free market capitalism. He is probably, all of this is debatable, the most famous proponent of it. So when you have discussions with socialists or Marxists or pro-government statists in general, typically they will assume that as a free market advocate that you probably are a Friedmanite of some kind. They might also think that you're the other ones that are bigger would be Adam Smith and Ayn Rand. And it is, I don't think it's fair to say that Milton Friedman was not a free market advocate. Indeed, he could be very eloquent at times. There's a famous video of him giving a lecture at a university, and a student asks him about I think it was the Ford Pinto and how it was so dangerous and would blow up and kill the occupant, and didn't that prove that the profit incentive motive was evil or whatever? And he was able to field a very emotionally loaded question like that very well, and he did that a lot. He was a great speaker. He was a very good debater, and he could be very eloquent, and he was usually right. However, there are important areas where he was notably less free market than some of the other alternatives, especially some of the Austrian alternatives. Not only the Austrians, but those are the main ones, who are considerably more free market, especially when it comes to monetary policy and a few other issues. Friedman, for instance, favored like vouchers, and I believe he wasn't as good on public utilities. I think he thought that you could have competition, but I don't think he was for a categorical end to, say, public roads. If you look at someone like Mises or Rothbard or their students and associates, like, they would be much more free market. And the thing is you almost never ever encounter anti-free market people who are even aware of those thinkers or writers. So I have never been accused of being a Misesian or an Austrian or a Rothbardian by a leftist. I have always been accused of being a Friedmanite or a Ayn Rand supporter, or maybe Adam Smith supporter, and that's just too bad, I think. I remember my first real introduction into economic thinking was a PBS documentary titled Commanding Heights, which was probably made more than 10 years ago now, maybe even 15 years ago. And at the time, I mean, the basic premise was a debate to cover the ideological debate between Keynes and then Hayek / Milton Friedman. And that the framing of the debate was that Keynes is the interventionist, not necessarily the socialist, but the interventionist regulator, and that Hayek and Friedman are the paragons of the opposite, of free market laissez-faire. And at the time, I mean, the documentary is actually a good documentary, but it seems to me like today that it's almost a hit piece against Mises, because he's basically omitted from the entire documentary. They mention him once, but only in the context of Friedman having attended his initial Mont Pelerin Society meeting, as if his significance is only that he had a conference that Friedman went to. And in the interview, Friedman actually says that Mises called him a socialist and stormed out of the room. And the few times that I have seen Friedman mention Mises, it has always been in the context of Mises being so radical as to be irrelevant. And never have I heard a kind word from Milton Friedman in regards to Mises. And perhaps he has made statements to that effect, but I've never seen them. So this is interesting, because if Milton Friedman is the paragon of free market capitalism as he is so often portrayed, this portrayal is problematic, because Friedman, by his own admission, says that there are other economists and political theorists who are more free market than is he. Mises, Rothbard, to name the two big ones, probably many more though. And I think it's interesting because now, especially now that Friedman's died, his Chicago school it's not non-existent. It still has an existence in academia, and it still has influence in the media. But I think that it's been, at least in popular culture, largely superseded by the Austrian school. In fact, so when you talk to libertarians today, they are far more likely to quote or to reference a book by Mises or Rothbard or Hayek, or even Tom Woods or Robert Murphy or Israel Kirzner, than they are to quote anything that Milton Friedman ever wrote. And it's not just libertarians. Even conservatives now are getting most of their talking points, their arguments, from Austrians. I mean, the ones that are going out and actually attempting to debate things like minimum wage or whatever other issues are out there, they are not going to Milton Friedman books. They're not going to Chicago school economists. They're going to Austrians. And so I believe that Milton Friedman has basically become a straw man of free markets. Not that he wasn't free market. I don't think it's fair to say that he wasn't, but that he is considerably less free market. And part of the reason I'm making this is the last video I did about Iceland, and because people said Iceland was free market, in certain important aspects it was interventionist controlled economy, and then it was in those areas that its troubles arose, and those are the same areas largely that Milton Friedman thinks should not be free market. He does not believe in free market currency. He doesn't even believe in a gold standard. He believed in a central bank, in manipulation of the money supply. He was basically an inflationist. He was a mild inflationist as opposed to some of the other schools out there. But any attempt to control the quantity of money, to me, is a rejection of free market principles and a very high form of conceit. And largely, I mean, it's too bad that he gets all this free market cred when there are others far better. And I think part of it is that the left really hates him, probably because of what happened in Chile, at least in part, and because he was so famous. And so since Mises was basically shunned by academia and never achieved much fame, I mean, he was probably at his most famous in the 20s and early 30s in Austria than he ever was in the West. And I mean, I think he's probably more famous now than he ever was in life. Whereas Friedman was probably the most famous economist in the world for, I don't know, 30 or 40 years. And so he draws a lot of the fire, but then, he kind of gives free markets a bad name because he wasn't that free market, and that's the kind of ironic negative aspect of all of this, is that you can have an economy like ours or like Iceland's that is it's a mixed economy. There are market forces at play, but then there are also areas that are strongly controlled and influenced by the government, like monetary policy. And it is in those areas that we see most of our problems coming from. And since Milton Friedman advocated that intervention, that type of intervention, maybe not every single policy, but in theory, at least, he believed in government management of the currency. To the extent that he believed that, people can validly say, well, Milton Friedman, he's the free market guy, and he supports that, hence that's free market. But that fails to realize, again, that those are areas where he was not free market. And I don't know, it's just really getting, it's really getting old. I've yet to have a socialist come up to me and off the bat start criticizing Mises or Rothbard. Occasionally, you'll get someone who will reference The Road to Serfdom by Hayek, which is not really even an economics text. It's an interesting book, well worth a read, but not the most free market book he ever wrote, even. They just come straight out criticizing Milton Friedman or Adam Smith, and I don't know. I don't feel like I need to carry the. I don't feel like I need to defend him any longer. But I find myself being strawmanned as a Friedmanite all the time, and it's kind of annoying. But I think that's changing. I think that thanks to the Mises Institute, the profile of the Austrians is on the rise. It's hard to say by how much, but that's all to the good. But I just wanted to cover Milton Friedman a little bit. Not go into depth on his economics, because to be perfectly honest, I'm probably not the best person to do that. But just his kind of role. He's the figurehead of free market capitalism, or at least one of the main ones, and so that he deserves a video, I guess.